Yo, what's up guys? It's Noah here. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about some NFL plays I like on Prizepicks for this week for the Week 13 slate. We're going to talk through 3 picks in this video. I'm recording this video on Friday night. Took a first look at the NFL board for this week, and I did find 3 props I like, kind of taking a first look at the board. As always, guys, if you guys do enjoy these Prizepicks videos, they do help you out. Please hit that like button down below. Hit that subscribe button if you have not yet. And if you guys are new to Prizepicks, if you have not checked them out, make sure to sign up for Prizepicks and use promo code NOAH. When you do sign up for Prizepicks with my promo code, you will get your first deposit matched up to $100. And if you guys do enjoy these YouTube videos, if they do help you out and you guys want more Prizepicks plays from me, I do provide those over on Patreon. As always, you can check out the Patreon content, link down below in the description. Either sometime Saturday night, late Saturday night, or early Sunday morning, I will be giving out more NFL props on Prizepicks on my Patreon. I have a full write-up for each play that I do provide over there. If you guys want to check out all the Patreon content, again, it's linked down below in the description. But let's talk through the 3 plays I like for this week. I have a rushing yard prop that I like for this week, and then I have 2 fantasy score props that I'm liking. So for rushing yards, I want to talk about a running back that's in a really, really good spot this week. Pretty much the best possible matchup you can get, and that's going to be Nick Chubb, and he's going up against the Texans. I mean, the Texans this season against the run, they've been one of the worst teams against the run this season. I like Nick Chubb to go over 90.5 rushing yards, and I know this line is really high, but obviously it's warranted just because, Nick Chubb so far this season, I mean, he's been one of the best running backs in the league. He's one of the most efficient running backs on the ground, and this matchup is about as good as it gets. So first off, looking at Nick Chubb's game log, he's played 11 games this season. He's gone over this line in 7 out of 11 games. So he's had at least 91 rushing yards in 7 out of 11 games. The games where he did not go over, one game against the Jets, he had 17 carries for 87 rushing yards, so he came up just short. Against the Patriots, really tough matchup. He had 12 carries for 56 yards. And then he faced Miami, had 11 carries for 63 yards. And he faced Buffalo, tough matchup, had 14 carries for 19 yards. That was, a tough game for him. But he's gone over this line still in 7 out of 11 games this season. And when you look at this matchup against the Texans, I mean, anything you look at against the run, the Texans are pretty much the worst in terms of rushing yards allowed, in terms of rushing yards per game, yards per carry. It doesn't matter. I mean, they're giving up the most rushing yards per game this season. They're giving up the most rushing touchdowns per game. In terms of rushing yards per game, they're giving up the most rushing yards per game. I'm sure they're giving up the most yards per carry as well. It's about as good of a matchup as it gets for Nick Chubb. And also the Texans, the Browns, they're really big favorites in this game. I think they're like double-digit favorites here, even playing on the road in Houston. I mean, right now the Browns are, they're favored by 7 right now, so they're big favorites. This is expected to be kind of a run-heavy game script for Cleveland. We know Cleveland's a team that wants to run the ball, especially when they get a lead. And usually when they're playing with the lead, they're just going to feed Nick Chubb. Now, could they change their offense a little bit this week with Deshaun Watson playing? Maybe they go a little bit more throw heavy, but I think we'll definitely see, especially like late in the game in the second half, the Browns will probably be playing with the lead, and they'll just be feeding Nick Chubb in the second half. I think he's got a really good chance to get like 20-plus carries here. Volume should be strong. Matchup is incredible. You look at what Chubb has done done in the past against Houston. Last 2 meetings against the Texans, 19 carries, 126 rushing yards for Nick Chubb, 11 carries, 95 rushing yards. So he's gone over this line, and his last 2 games against Houston. You look at what some of the running backs have done against Houston this season. I mean, Derrick Henry ran for 219 yards. Jonathan Taylor ran for 161. Saquon Barkley, 152 yards. Josh Jacobs, 143. Miles Sanders, 93 yards. I mean, Dontrell Hilliard had 83 rushing yards against the Texans. I think Nick Chubb's got a good chance to get 91 rushing yards this week. Right now, DraftKings Sportsbook, they do have this line at 94.5. I wouldn't be surprised if you see this line get up over 100. Like, I think a lot of people are going to be on this, which, anytime there's a lot of people on a certain prop, it seems to always just disappoint. But, man, this spot is so good for Nick Chubb. He should be very efficient here. If he gets 18, 20 carries, which he possibly could, and what should be a positive game script for him, he should definitely get 91-plus rushing yards. So that's what I like as our first prop for this week, guys. Nick Chubb to have more than 90.5 rushing yards. And then the 2 fantasy score props that I like are both going to come from the late afternoon games, from these 4 o'clock games. We got some exciting games, in the late afternoon. And I want to talk about this Chiefs and Bengals game. It's expected to be, kind of the best game of the week. Should be a shootout here. Joe Burrow, 20 fantasy score for Joe Burrow. I do like the over here. And you look at what Joe Burrow's done this season over his last 5 games. He's only gone over this in 2 out of 5 games. But on the season, he has gone over this line in 6 out of 11 games. And what makes me really like this prop is just, the game environment here. This Chiefs Bengals game right now does have the highest total on the slate, 53 implied total here. This game should probably be a shootout. When these teams play, it always seems to be a really high-scoring game. Over their last two meetings, the Chiefs and the Bengals, Joe Burrow has gone over this fantasy score line in both games. Last time they played in the AFC Championship, I believe last year in the AFC Championship, Joe Burrow had 21.5 fantasy points, and then they played in the regular season. In that same season, Joe Burrow had 34.8 fantasy points. So, and like the final score, like in the AFC Championship last year, it was 27-24. In the regular season, the previous couple weeks before that, it was 34-31. So when these two teams played last season, it was two pretty high-scoring games. I think we could definitely see that be the case once again this week. And you think about 20 fantasy score, like what does Joe Burrow need to go over this line? I think 300 passing yards and 2 touchdowns is kind of what I'm hoping for, and that's basically what he's projected for. Right now, his passing yard prop on DraftKings Sportsbook, it's set at 296.5. So he's projected for about 300 passing yards here. We know this Bengals offense, they're kind of like a pass-heavy offense. They might be getting Jamar Chase back this week. So Joe Burrow, any week, has a good chance to throw for 300-plus yards. Again, his passing yard prop is set at 296 or 294.5. And if you look at his passing touchdown prop, it's set at 1.5 on DraftKings Sportsbook with minus 230 on the over. So Joe Burrow is a massive, massive favorite to throw 2 touchdowns. 290 yards, 2 touchdowns, and maybe like 10 rushing yards. That would put Joe Burrow over a 20 fantasy score, and I think he can definitely get there. There's a chance he throws 3-4 touchdowns here. I know the last few games, like one of the games they faced the Chiefs, he threw for 4 touchdowns. Last time they faced the Chiefs, he threw for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had, I think, some rushing points as well, because 250 and 2 wouldn't put him over, but I think he did have some rushing yards and maybe a rushing touchdown last time they faced Kansas City. Not we don't need a rushing touchdown here. We just need 280, 290 yards, 2 touchdowns, and maybe like 10, 15 rushing yards. But obviously, there's plenty of ways for Burrow to go over this 20 fantasy score line. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. It should be a shootout here. We know the Bengals are kind of a pass-heavy offense. They're going to be getting Jamar Chase back, or at least they're expected to get Jamar Chase back this week, which I think is just a boost for their offense in general. And you look at the Chiefs this season, they've been pretty solid against the run, but they've definitely struggled against the pass. If you look at where they rank in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks, they are inside the top 10 in terms of fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, giving up the 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So kind of all the boxes are checked here for Burrow. I think he's got a good chance to come away with at least 20 fantasy points this week. And then the third and final prop that I like for this week is we're going to go to this Raiders and Chargers game. Devontae Adams, his fantasy score line does feel a little bit too low for me as well. I think this line could definitely be like 20.5, 21.5, 18.5. Does feel a little bit low here. I like the over here for Devontae Adams, and I know he came up just short last week. He finished with 14.4 fantasy points. I know he came up just short of his receiving yard prop. I played his receiving yard prop last week, and I think he finished with I think he was like 4. I can't remember. I think maybe like 10 or 11 yards short. But I think 18.5 fantasy points for Adams. This is a line that he can definitely go over in multiple ways because he's going to rack up a ton of receptions. His receptions the last few games, like he's been getting a ton of receptions. Like last week against Seattle, he had 7 receptions, 7, 9, 10. So the floor he has just from receptions is huge. Obviously, with the fantasy score, you're getting a point per reception. So he's basically he's getting 7, 8, 9 points alone just from catches, and that doesn't include what he's getting from yards. And if he were to get into the end zone, he's gone over this line in 6 out of 11 games. He's gone over this line in 3 out of their last 4 games. We have seen some low gains from Devontae Adams this year. Like he had that game against the Saints where he only had like 1.2 fantasy points. That's just obviously an outlier. You can't expect that to happen again. But you look at some of his other games this season, like against Arizona, he had 2 catches for 12 yards and a touchdown. But a lot of these games, man, like week 1 against the Chargers, when they did face the Chargers at the beginning of the season, he had 30 fantasy points, 10 catches for 141 yards and a touchdown. He had 17 targets. The volume has been amazing for Devontae Adams. He's had double-digit targets in 4 straight games. He's clearly, Derek Carr's top target. This is another great game environment. This Chargers-Raiders game does have one of the highest totals on the slate right now. This game currently has a 49.5 total, which is 3rd highest on the slate, behind obviously Bengals, Chiefs, and then behind the Lions and Jaguars game. So this is another game that should be relatively high scoring, should be a shootout. This Chargers secondary, I'm not too afraid of. And I think Davante Adams, at this point, he's basically matchup proof anyway. We know he's going to get the volume. Derek Carr is going to target him a ton. He's had double-digit targets in 4 straight games. He continues to get massive volume. I think he's averaging like 11 targets per game this year. 18.5 fantasy points. I mean, he could have like 7 catches for, 7 catches, 70 yards and a touchdown. He doesn't need to get to a touchdown though. Like he could have 9 catches for 90 yards or 9 catches for 95 yards, something like that. That would put him right there. He could have like 11 catches for 80 yards. I mean, he just has so many ways to go over this line. When he's getting so many targets, it's so easy for him to hit this line because he could just have a ton of yards, rack up a ton of receptions. He could get into the end zone. I don't think he has to get into the end zone to go over this line. So, like, if you're looking at some of his other props, like there is a touchdown prop up for Davante Adams. His receiving yards, I think, is set at like 90. He does have a touchdown prop available, if you want to take that, and then his receptions is set at 7. I think he could go over this fantasy score line without going over like the touchdown. I mean, you add up his receiving yards plus receptions, that's 16.5 fantasy points, assuming he lands on the exact same amount of both of those. And then, not including if you were to catch a touchdown. But like over his last few games, I know there was a game recently where he didn't get into the end zone, but he did still go over this fantasy score line. So it was, let's see. So there was a game he had 17.5 fantasy points without a touchdown, so he came up just short. There was a game against Denver, he had 19.5 fantasy points with no touchdown. He had 9 catches for 101 yards. So, obviously we want him to catch a touchdown. Anytime you're taking fantasy score, you're hoping a guy gets into the end zone. But I don't think he has to get into the end zone to go over this line. So if you wanted to take over 0.5 receiving touchdowns, you could. But I think the fantasy score I like more just because I feel like if he does catch a touchdown, he's probably going to go over this fantasy score line. And I could definitely see a scenario where he doesn't catch a touchdown, but still finishes with more than 18.5 fantasy points. I think Davante Adams is poised to have a big game here anyways. But I think fantasy score is probably the prop that I like the most. I think this line could definitely be a little bit higher. So that's what I'm liking, guys, for this Week 13 NFL slate. Some 3 picks I like, just kind of taking a first look at the board on Friday night. Again, I'm going to be sharing some more plays for NFL this week. Going to share those over on Patreon. As always, if you guys want to get more Prizepicks plays from me, I give a full write-up for each play I do provide on Patreon. You can check that out. Link down below in the description. But I wish you guys the best of luck this week. I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, hit that like button if you guys did enjoy. Hit that subscribe button if you have not yet. And if you're new to Prizepicks, make sure to check them out. Sign up with promo code Noah. When you do sign up for Prizepicks with my promo code, you will get your first deposit matched up to $100. But best of luck this week, guys. Thanks as always for watching the videos, supporting the content. Appreciate you guys a ton. We will see you in the next one.